First, to the Fitch downgrade, how concerned are you by the trajectory for Israel's economy right now?
Well, actually, the downgrade of Fitch came after the rating was already downgraded by the two other rating agencies, and it's not surprising. And as you mentioned, their main concern is the assessment of higher security and geopolitical risks. But they're also concerned about the fact that the deficit of the government is growing beyond what was already expected. So I think that the security risks are, of course, here, and the war has been longer than previous rounds of fighting here. But I think the main issue that the government could deal with is the effects on the budget and the deficit. And that's where I think looking forward, there is something that the government can do. I have to say that in the past, we have seen a strong recovery of the economy from previous wars and previous shocks, global shocks. So in that sense, there are some basic elements of resilience, but this war is longer, so we'll have to see, whether it escalates or not. That would be very crucial also for the economy.
Indeed, and the war appears to not be slowing down. So in your view, is Israel heading for a recession? And if so, how deep could it be?
Well, the current or the latest projections are talking about a growth rate of 1.5% this year and 4.2% next year. So this is not a recession. However, the assumption underlying these projections is that the war will sort of end by the end of the year, and then we'll start seeing a recovery next year. So the big question is whether that really will materialize, or we will see escalation and maybe other fronts. So it's a moment of great uncertainty. Right now, what we see in the economy is a recovery in consumption. And generally, there is a recovery, but it's mild because the war and the fighting still goes on. There are some sectors that have been particularly affected, like tourism, of course, and that will take a long time to recover, but also construction that is very dependent on Palestinian workers and on foreign workers that are now not available, and also the agricultural sector that has been suffering from, first of all, it's located around the borders, so it's in a way in a war zone, but also it's dependent on foreign workers. So we see areas in which the economy is suffering, but the overall activity, it's not a recession, but it's definitely a very basic slowdown that will very much depend on how things evolve.
Let's unpack some of the measures that the government is taking in response. For example, we've already seen the ultra-Orthodox population being put back into the military. The central bank says that is going to help to support the economy. But when you look at the situation on the ground, do you believe that this is a government that has the capacity and the political will to mitigate the damage moving forward, particularly when you look at this from a market investment perspective, from an investor confidence perspective? Why would anyone want to invest in Israel right now?
Well, there are two sides to that. First of all, as I mentioned before, the economy has exhibited resilience in the past, and we've seen strong recovery from all the shocks in the past. However, it's true that so far the government has not presented a 2025 budget that will fundamentally change the course, and in terms of the priority of spending, in terms of introducing tax measures. So this is really a big test. And I think that also the rating agencies and the markets will be watching whether the government is able to present a budget that really changes the priorities within the spending and also announces revenue measures sufficient so that the deficit will not exceed something around 4%, which will imply that the debt to GDP ratio will not continue to rise. So far, it's true that the shaky coalition and the power of some, I would say, sectorial parts of the coalition have not made it easier to actually make a change in the priority of the budget. I think the spending on ultra-Orthodox education needs to really ensure that they get a core curriculum that will help them actually in the future get into the labor market. I think the incentives there have to be changed in a way that will increase the participation of the ultra-Orthodox and their level of skills. It's a growing part of the population, so it has a very important weight also for the ability of the economy to grow in the future.